Hello, ladies. Today we're going to talk about 4 ways for you to be interesting on a date. So, we're going to talk about some dating tips and some dating secrets to hopefully help you get a great second date with that great, cute guy that's going to ask you out soon. First of all, how do you make sure that you are interesting? Well, to be interesting, you have to have a lot of interest, right? You have to have things that you're passionate about, things you're excited about, things you can talk about that makes you look alive and be animated on a date, or speak quickly where the guy knows, wow, she's actually really into this. So what are some things that make you interesting? For example, if you love to hike, or like me, these are all of my hiking and running stuff. I love hiking, running, biking, burro races. I love being out in nature. I love going out to shop. I love eating. So all those things that you talk about on a date, when he says, hey, what do you like to do for fun? Hopefully you have at least 5 things you could rattle off with, so he knows, like, wow, she's not boring. She's actually pretty cool and she likes these things. So when you say you like hiking, you can elaborate like, oh yeah, last week I just went on this great hike. It was up at this mountain. We did 5 to 7 miles, and there was a waterfall at the end, and it was just so awesome. I just love it so much. I wish I could do it more often and get out in nature. And when you say you wish you could do something in the future, that also gives the guy a light bulb moment, like, oh, great, she'll probably want to go on a hike with me on a second date. So there are ways that you can kind of drop hints that you would like to do a certain thing on a second date. So that in turn helps the guy ask you out and has something to do, like something in mind already. So that's actually a good thing. For example, if you love reading, make sure you say, gosh, I love reading. I love going to Barnes & Noble. I love the smell of books when I walk in. Or I have this great library down the street. Or I love audiobooks. I just read this great book last week. So talk about things like that where he feels like, okay, she's really into this. Because how many times on our dating profiles we just list maybe 20 things that we've maybe have done once in our lifetime, but it's not actually a real hobby or interest, right? So on a date, when you can talk about your actual hobby and interests, you can actually really get into it and really talk about it animated way that he knows that this is what you're really into. If you like cooking, tell him about the last time you took a cooking class, or tell him about the last time that you cooked a great meal and what was it, and that you can say, gosh, I would love to cook you my best lasagna sometime. So that kind of gives him a hint that, oh, you're interested in him. Maybe you would want a second or third date and you would cook for him later. And it kind of shows that maybe you will be a great mom because you do know how to cook, and that you have different interests like that. If it's not cooking or not reading, or maybe it's movies. Well, what kind of movies? You can also say, I love movies. I love going out to see them. I love getting popcorn. I love just watching the previews before the movies. It's just the whole experience is great. Or if you're really into just Netflix, then let them know that too. Because if you're into that, then maybe he can invite you out next time to go over to his place to watch a movie or something. So there are ways that when you're talking about your interests on a date, that you can say, oh, I would love that. I love eating out. I love sushi. Oh yeah, there's a new place that just opened up a couple weeks ago. I would love to take you there sometime. So there's totally nothing wrong with kind of setting it up for later, for a second date. So just if you have interests, make sure you talk about them with passion. And if you have to ask yourself, gosh, am I boring? Do I not have enough interest? If you have to ask yourself if you're boring or not, then you probably are boring. Yeah, sorry to break it to you, but if you have to ask, then you probably are. So if you don't have enough interest that you can rattle off, maybe you can join meetup groups, maybe you can take a new class, go online to look up different activities you can do? Is it learning a new language? Is it learning how to sew, to make a quilt? Is it learning how to hike, going on longer distances? Maybe you want to run from, 0 to 5K. Maybe you want to get different activities in your life so you can talk about it when you're on a date. So one way to be more interesting on a date is to have interests that you can rattle off. Number 2, for you to be an interesting person is you have to act interested, right? So in order for you to act interested, you have to ask questions. So be in the moment when he's talking about something. Ask a question that pertains to that and keep the conversation going. So it's not like an interview style. It's just casually talking, casually asking him the next question about what he's talking about. And don't be afraid to ask questions because it shows you're interested. And there are so many times that people go out on dates and they just don't ask questions. And it's great that you're a good listener because I get it. You might be more of an introvert, you might be a little bit shyer, but you need to chime in. It's a one-on-one date and he wants to get to know you better. And by the questions you ask, shows how interested you are in him. So just don't forget to ask questions. That's actually for guys and girls. I feel like sometimes on a date, 2 people like each other. The date feedback I get is that they liked each other, but they weren't sure because that person didn't really ask any questions about her. So she's not sure. Does he like me? I think he does, but he didn't really say it, so I'm not sure. So number 3, for you to be interesting on a date and get a second date, you should be a good storyteller. I'm not saying you have a bunch of stories up your sleeve and you're just like an entertainer and all that, but have 1 or 2 good stories that you can tell and that might get a chuckle out of him, So you can practice that with your friends. If there's something that you talk about with your friends, maybe you talk about it with your coworker, and then you kind of change the storytelling a little bit. Maybe you want to add like a joke in there. Maybe you want to make it more interesting, but keep telling stories to everyone around you until you have a couple of good stories. I have a funny story, actually. I don't have kids. I never really wanted kids. When I met my husband, he is 10 years younger than me. So when I met him, he was 26, I was 36. And if I really wanted kids, I feel like I would have had them by then. So I actually don't have a problem if one day, we've been together 15 years now. So if one day a guy or girl comes up to our door and says, "Hey, I'm Phil's kid," and that person is 16 years old, I don't have a problem with being a stepmom. I would love if a random person came up and said, "Hey, Phil's my dad." I would love to have a kid in my life that way. And when I tell people that story, they think, A, it's weird because if he has a kid, it's not mine. I would be upset. But no, I actually would be okay with it. And as long as the kid's over the age of 15, because we've been together 15 years, right? Like, if the kid is younger than 15, it means he cheated on me, and that's not a good thing. But if the kid is over 15 or 16, that's fine. So anyway, that's just like a funny story that I tell sometimes, but it's probably funnier if I told it in an audience. Kind of weird. I tell it on a podcast and I don't really get any reaction, so it's kind of weird. But anyway, to be a great storyteller is always good. Just act like you're talking to a best friend or a future friend, just be casual about it. And really get to know your date that way by kind of being honest what you're really feeling and stuff. The 4th thing for you to be interesting on a date and to get a second date is to actually tell him that you had a great time and that you want to see him again. So there's nothing wrong with being upfront about how you feel about him, because especially if you do want to see him again, the last thing you want is for him to be like, "Well, she's kind of cool, but she didn't really seem like she liked me, so I'm not going to ask her out again." So I guess it's kind of like high school, where if a guy likes you and then you kind of like him back. So it's kind of like that. If you let a guy know you had a great first date, then he might be more willing to ask you out on a second date because he knows that he won't get rejected, right? He will know that if you want to see him again and he'll ask you out and you'll say yes for sure, then that's a great thing, right? That's no pressure for the guy. So there's totally nothing wrong with letting a guy know that you want to see him again, especially if you had a great time. You're just being honest. So those are my 4 tips on 4 ways to be interesting on a date and for you to get a second date. Ladies, if you're single, I'm always on the lookout for great Asian women to date my guys. So if you're single, please go to 2asianmatchmakers.com, click under profile and fill it out. That way I have your information and I can get in touch with you if a great guy wants to meet you. So until then, see you next time. Bye.